Welcome to the Beth Yeshua podcast. For more episodes like this, visit bethyeshua.org/media. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Beth Yeshua podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Josh Rubenstein, and I'm here with my mom. Hi, Mom.
Hey, Josh. So good to be back.
And I just want to remind everybody really quick, housekeeping as we get started. We're in the middle of a series of talking about identity, and we're going to be talking about a little bit of that today, our takeaways from our talk with Rabbi Gliebe. And then we're also going to be discussing a little bit of October 7th. It was just the anniversary of October 7th, the attack against Israel. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as we get started. But if you want to see us and not just listen to us, you can head over to YouTube, do a search for Beth Yeshua Sac, or you can find us on Spotify. They do video podcasts on there. So we'll start off today. I don't know about you, Mom, but the anniversary of October 7th kind of hit me hard.
Yeah.
I saw people's posts on social media of my Jewish friends and family members talking about, let's remember the 1,200 plus that were killed. I was reminded, not really by social media posts, but I was reminded that babies were murdered, that like hundreds of women were raped.
I know.
And it's just staggering, like how profound the destruction was. And I was just wondering, how did it hit you when October 7th came around?
Well, of course, you know, we have many, many friends in Israel, some lifelong friends in Israel, and I won't mention any names. But first of all, I was so concerned. Are they okay? But It's hard to be concerned just for my own, the ones that I care the most about, but to be concerned about that whole nation, about everything that's going on and how many vulnerable people are there. And somebody was commenting how, you know, we go about our regular day. We don't think of our regular day as involving going into a safe room. We don't think about, don't get too far from our houses because we've got to be close to the safe room. And I just find it incredibly, the word invasive comes to me because it was an invasion. It was a massive invasion. But there are very vulnerable people, with one exception, of course. The big exception is they're God's people, and He's watching over them. And I feel, you know, we saw how the three different mechanisms for stopping the missiles, how they work, the dome, everything. But a few did get through, but fortunately, they happened to hit areas that were not, people weren't there, etc. But God is 100% protecting. And to me, that was the other thing that came up. It was like the enemy was coming in like a flood, but God was raising His standard. And I was in communication with some of our close friends in Israel recently on several occasions for other matters. And I just told them how concerned I was. And they just said, it's almost like they said, God's got this. And they're right there. They're in Haifa. They're right there. Yeah. So how about you?
Yeah. You know, the interesting thing is that war has escalated since then. And it's become very, very clear for people that don't want to be willfully ignorant that Iran is behind all of this, both the attack with Hamas in the south, but also Hezbollah in the north.
Right.
And, of course, the direct launching of ICBMs at Israel, 182, I think, missiles just a week ago as we came up to Rosh Hashanah. I was listening to an interview with Naftali Bennett, former Prime Minister of Israel, and he was talking about the fact that really this war has revealed peeled away the false layer of the safety, or like whatever people thought was like maybe Iran wasn't really trying to pursue the destruction of the Jewish people and all of that other stuff. And it's really peeled away that false veneer. And you can see with clarity, Iran desires the absolute destruction of the Jewish people. The chant of, you know, from the river to the sea means the destruction of the Jewish people. If you press people who are pro-Palestinian often, and you really get down to it, what they actually want to see is the Jewish people utterly gone from the land, and they don't care how. And I've been struck by that, like the reality that it's all clearer now, and yet people are completely blind to that. I know, for example, my daughter has a bunch of friends on social media, some of them who profess to be believers in God and some of them who don't. And the overwhelming response from people her generation has been anti-Israel, has been, this is Israel's fault. They have killed Palestinian babies. They have raped. They have murdered. And so this is justified. This is an oppressed people striking back. And she has to listen to that lie and see that lie over and over and over again.
Wow.
I think the only thing that hasn't peeled back from that false veneer is that is anti-Semitism.
Absolutely.
It's not just ignorance. It is 100% anti-Semitic to say that the Jewish people deserved what happened on October 7th. I mean, it is. It's like the people that shame women who are raped because they were dressed inappropriately. It's like, oh, well, she was asking for it because of the way that she was dressed. No, like Israel is asking for it because we exist. It's the reason why Israel is hated is because it even exists. And so it's so polarizing that it's very clear to me that there's just a spiritual battle involved. Like there's a side that can actually see this for what it is, and that it is god awful and horrible. And I'm not making excuses for any evil that Israel has ever done, because I don't think that they're morally pure in any way. But I'm also not willing to excuse the just absolute disgusting evil that was unleashed upon the Jewish people on October 7th. And people are unable to see. It's almost like the weird reality that we have. I noticed your I voted sticker.
Yes.
We have this polarizing reality in our politics right now too, where people like only believe in their camp and they hate the other camp. Like they can't stand the other people. And it is that polarizing, hateful, gross spirit that I think actually comes from the enemy. I think
and in the case of Jews, it's demonizing them. Even it's not just minimizing or like saying, oh well, all of people in this camp are stupid. How could they think the way they're thinking? They must not be intelligent, which I find really, really ridiculous. That people can just judge people based on what they think is proper thinking. We're so weird about that. But I want to say one thing about kind of the way I was raised that I think has impacted what's going on in Israel. I was raised with certain biases and certain prejudices. I think we all were in some ways, some for good and some for bad. But when you look to see what has happened with the Palestinian people, with the way their children are taught, even in the schools at the very youngest of ages, that they are taught to hate Jews. Hate Jews, see them as the absolute enemy of their souls. And so for little kids, some of the reports that have come back, I don't think the people who've come back from having been held hostage have been able to share completely, because I think when they do, it's going to jeopardize those who are still behind. But some of the information that's leaked out has been how little bitty children not just spit in their faces, but they did horrible things to them. And they were encouraged to do horrible things. And I think about that, like when we were hippies, it was like important to us that our children displayed our values, because it was almost like it validated where we were at. And
all parents,
all parents do that. I mean, why is it that kids come up with the thoughts and the feelings that they have? And that's why I've said to you, you've got to act the way from what you've come from. You've got to see things through your eyes with that different perspective, standing on the shoulders of my generation and not freshen. But look at this. That's what is over there. That's what's going on. And it's not just in Israel, sadly.
I know.
It's in America. And the anti-Semitism is so prevalent right now that it's almost like thick. It's like walking through mud because it's hard. It's like feeling being intimidated to whether or not to say what you really think about something. except
Right.
with God, with special friends, you're going to say this or that, especially during these political times with an
I
election
know.
coming up.
I
You
know.
don't dare
I
say
know.
to me. I just say I have some litmus tests. I have things I look at, and they're all biblical. And to me, those are what I look for in a candidate. Period. Let's don't even
Right.
talk party. Let's talk about what do I think God is trying to say.
Right.
But at any rate, I mean, to me, all that and all of it being centered around this election time is even more. It's just more heinous. I don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just hard to grasp how evil it has become.
Yeah. I
And
agree.
and I don't want to be discouraged by it because we have read the last chapter. We do know
Right.
that God wins, and
Right.
we do know that we're on His team.
Yep.
But
It's weird to live in these times, isn't it? When we
it
see
is.
these evil things on the rise, it's interesting. I was thinking about we're going to debrief about listening to Rabbi Gliebe also. I think it would be easy also for us to forget that Messianic Judaism is a movement of God, that the Jewish
Yes.
people being back in the land is a movement of God, that there's
Thank you.
great miracle in these things, that there was such protection from the ICBMs that were launched last week. There is
That's
the
right.
hand of God in this. And I think we know too much. I was reading the other day because I'm getting ready to read them to my son. I was reading the Little House on the Prairie series, and I was struck by how small their world was and how
That's true.
simple it was because of that. I think that the reality of us being so plugged in globally means that we are aware of things that are way beyond our scope and what we should even be worried about. I think it's one of the reasons for the increase in anxiety. I think that the younger generation knows what's going on all the time. And of course, it's, as journalists, we know that it's always the bad things that tend to rise to the top and get broadcast the most.
If it
And that's
bleeds,
the
it
same
leads.
on,
Yeah.
yeah, it's the same on ABC or CNN or Fox or TikTok. Like all of them have that same algorithm of the bad things are going to go to the top because we as humans can't look away. Like those are the things that pull us in.
That's right.
But, we weren't, I don't think, designed for more than much like a simple life and much more a simple life. And when I was looking at I'm in the one where it's the farmer boy right now, and it's Almanzo, and his entire life is chores. It's just working on the farm, chores, and moments of fun, and then chores, and then eating together with his family, and then chores. And man, when your life was about survival,
That's right.
it kept things in perspective. And so anyways, I think it's important for us to remember too that God's told us things to do, and we just obey, and we be present in the middle of it. God has called you and I to be part of Messianic Judaism, and so we obey, and we be part of it, and we be in the middle of it. And yes, parts of it are messy and things that we can't even fix. And okay, so what? So in the midst of what we are called to do in our daily life, we'll be obedient, and we'll obey, and we'll leave the rest of it in God's hands, because it's not in our hands anyways. And for us to allow these thoughts to cripple us or take control of how we live our lives, I think honestly is giving in to the enemy.
I do too, and it's back to the fear thing.
Right.
I mean, we're not to fear man or what man
Right.
can do or the machinations. We're to fear only God, who is who judges rightly and is holy. And it is hard. It's easy to get distracted. I do think it's interesting when you talk about it being a big world, and maybe we weren't. And I think rightly we weren't intended to have that big of a world. But look at a child's world. You just did when you were talking about the Little House on the Prairie. You're looking at his world. You're looking at the chores, the this, the that. And as I'm getting older, I'm seeing that older people kind of start to have a smaller bubble. Typically, I don't.
You don't. Your
I
life is
don't.
pretty busy.
I
Right.
don't. But yet there is that part about, okay, did the dishes get washed? Did I put
Right.
that thing in the freezer, or is it going to spoil? There's those little tiny things. Did I make my bed today? Yes, I did. Thank you very much.
Well done. I did not. I did not. Should have.
But that world can feel. I mean, that's the world that we were intended for. We're not meant to, certainly not meant to worry about that other part. But yet we
Right.
do have the power to pray for that. So if that would be what it triggers us to do, that's a good thing.
I agree.
But the worrying is the problem. Yeah.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of a transition into what Rabbi Gliebe was talking
Yes.
about. And yeah, rather than re-summarize it and rehash it, maybe what were your takeaways? What were the things that really struck you about what he said, both as they relate to like your own life within Messianic Judaism? And I think you have a significant role within Messianic Judaism, as being part of that founding generation and married to one of those founders of a community, and then also being asked, to present papers and other things like that. What were your kind of like big takeaways or aha moments?
Well, I guess first of all, I need to say that I have the utmost respect for Rabbi Gliebe. Rabbi Gliebe has chosen to stand up for some things that I've chosen to stand up for that are not very popular, even
Right.
within Messianic Judaism. And one of the things he talks about that kind of struck me was he's saying, well, a couple of things. One of the things he was talking about is how when Messianic Judaism started, it had a specific, distinct purpose to be
Right.
a place of where Messianic Jews, new believers who are Jewish, could remain Jews and worship in a
Right.
synagogue,
Right.
and then kind of where it's come from there. And I personally, being in an intermarried family, having been the Gentile one of the intermarriage, I think I've been carrying some guilt. And I mentioned this
In
to
what
you
way?
earlier.
In what way?
Well, I feel guilt for these intermarried families, especially the ones who look to us as the Messianic community, to kind of fix what's broken in their children and in their lives. I married a Jewish person. I did not think about the fact that he was Jewish when I married him. I thought about the fact that he believed in God. That it meant something to me, even though I was far from God at the time.
Right.
But when I chose that, Frank, I really believe God had a hand in that, just as God had a hand in you finding a Jewish partner when your wife, when you weren't even thinking on that level.
No,
But
I was not.
and so for me, I don't know if it's because my Jewish husband then became a rabbi for our Messianic congregation and helped found it. And it was a struggle for me. But I had to come to a place, and your dad had to come to a place where we decided that how important it was that our home was a Jewish home, or as Kurt Gliebe said, we would not have Jewish grandchildren if we
Right.
care about our generations. So for me, I felt so bad for the families who are intermarried, and they themselves are intermarried, and now their children have intermarried, and they want us to fix it. And I wanted to fix it.
Right.
And I just felt a weight of guilt came off my shoulders as Kirk was talking, because I can't fix it. And they've made choices that they need to make some new choices. So
Right.
even the parents of some of those kids who have chosen to intermarry, whether they thought about it or not, but
Right.
it's kind of diluted the Jewish existence in their family. And so it's going to continue to dilute unless somebody does something. But it's not we as the whole community. We can love
Right.
them and do what we can, but we cannot go back and fix those kids
Right.
for them.
So yeah, a couple
I was
things come to
feeling
mind.
guilt about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One is he talked about the importance of addressing things before they even begin.
Right.
When a couple has already gotten married and they've already entered into things, and maybe even then later beginning to wrestle with identity and everything else, that's certainly a place that we can enter in as a community, but only if both parties want us to be involved.
Absolutely.
It is such a place of delicacy in their own relationship within the marriage that if even one of them is like, man, I really like Jewish identity is super important to me. Like I really want to have a Jewish home, have Jewish children, but the other one is not there yet. Like until God does that, there's
Right.
not you can't argue that person into it. And so like you're saying,
No.
like the Band-Aid on the back end of like, can we go and like fix this? Well, yes, in some ways. If both of them come to a place within their marriage and the leading of God I
Yes.
want this. We want this. Let's make this happen.
Yes.
And we have all sorts of resources for
Absolutely.
that. But until that comes, there's not much we can do. But the second part of that is, I think a lot of that first generation of Messianic Jews had conversations with their kids about who to marry, because you always do when you're a parent. And I think that those conversations were about the importance of finding somebody who also was a Yeshua follower.
Yes.
Somebody who loved Yeshua. And I'm not saying that that's not the most important. It is. That is the most important thing. Yes, you need to find a follower of Yeshua. But it also made me think, because I know Rabbi Gliebe, both of his children have married Jewish believers. And both of those, like, they have Jewish homes. They now have Jewish grandchildren that are grandbabies for him. He had explicit conversations with his children. Yes, I want you to find a Yeshua follower, and I want them to be a Jew. Mm-hmm. And so find somebody who fits that definition. Or keep looking. And I realized I had only ever told my kids, like, I want somebody that loves Yeshua and has all their teeth. That was it. Like, and the second one is not really that important. But I went to my oldest after having this conversation with Rabbi Gliebe, and I said, I do want you to understand that God has called us to be part of Messianic Judaism. And I believe that that's a calling for you also. And I think that it is important for you to look for a Jewish person in your spouse. And I just want to say it explicitly, and I want you to know, I think it's important. And it maybe is more important than we know, or maybe it's less important than we think, but I feel this unction inside of me that I want to have that conversation with my kids in a different way. And I think for a lot of Messianic Jews in that first generation, the importance was, especially for many of them, because coming to Messiah faith had been such a journey and maybe even been very difficult, and maybe there had been opposition even from their Jewish family to even finding faith in Messiah. I could see why faith in Messiah was reserved for that prime spot of, like, this is who you need to look for as you marry. And to be fair, many of those kids have found Messiah believers. They have found people that love Yeshua. But not many of them have found the Jewish component, and I think it's something that we need to start to explicitly have conversations with. And it's not a popular conversation, I think, right now, because it feels discriminatory, it feels elitist, it feels like you're being, like, exclusive.
Right.
And yet, if we genuinely believe what we've been saying this entire podcast, which is there's actually a call on the Jewish people, 99% of what we do in our daily lives is very similar to what Gentiles do who also love Yeshua.
That's right.
But there's this 1% of things that are uniquely reserved as commandments for us that we are called to wrestle with and to bear and to keep for the rest of our generations. And we're going to have to change that conversation if we want to transmit it to the next generation. That was a huge takeaway for me.
Yeah.
A huge takeaway for me.
Well, it's funny you said that you had a conversation with your oldest being my granddaughter. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I said the gender there.
No, that's fine.
she knows who she is. But I had that conversation with her just recently, too. And I said, it is so important that that identity continues in your life. And I know that your dad would at least want very much to have a conversation about, is this going to be a Jewish home? Even if the person happens to be Gentile, but is open for that to becoming a Jewish home. And the fact that she is female, so that man is going to be the, quote, spiritual head of that home. And is he on board about that? I think that is important. And that's what we did. We didn't do it with you, but we said it with Sarah when Sarah was married, because she married somebody not Jewish. And but also that it really means something. It means something important to God. And we don't understand all of it. Much of it is still a mystery. We don't want to be exclusive or not being inclusive, which, all the various criticisms. We don't want to be elitist, but we need to call things what they are. And it is what it is. None of us chose what ethnicity we were. God placed us. He did that. He chose that I would not be born Jewish. Okay.
Right.
But look at the path he chose for me. But also at the same time, he gave me a lot of choice. And I think that's something that we've got to instill in our kids, and they've got to hear it at every level. They're hearing it
Right.
from you as a parent, but I think a grandparent's voice is very strong.
Oh, for sure.
And they need to hear from a grandparent. There is a reason for this, and God will have the love of your life be who that person needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
And at any rate, I mean, I that to me was a huge takeaway.
You
A
know what I
huge
think they also,
takeaway.
the other level that they need to hear it from is from Messianic Judaism. I
Yes.
think that they actually need to hear from the UMJC and from the MJAA. It is
Yes.
important for you to raise Jewish children. It is
Yes.
important for those Jewish children to be faithfully part of Jewish community and faithful to Messiah. And they need to know that that is something that is on every level important to us as a community.
That's right.
Otherwise, as Rabbi Gliebe said, within 2 generations, we're no longer Jews.
Right. Right. Well, even for our halacha for Beth Yeshua, a person having one identifiably Jewish grandparent. But
Right.
we're getting to the point where we're having people having an identifiable great grandparent, and nobody's recognizing that as a Jewish person for Jewish
Right.
identity.
Right.
And
Right.
so it's slipping away. This is the generation that this has to be corrected. This has to
Right.
be addressed. But God
Right.
knows that. And I think that's why he's put it on our hearts. And I believe he's going to put it on the hearts of our children. But we need to be there to reinforce it.
Yeah.
So,
Do you think, I mean, you went to the most recent national convention for the UMJC. My general impression is that member communities of the UMJC are not having a lot of these conversations, these sort of philosophical conversations. They're just kind of like abiding by what their bylaws already are, or the original vision of what they were when they were called. Are people wrestling with identity? Are people wrestling with intermarriage? It's weird to me that we're having conversations about whether or not rabbis should be female, but we're not having conversations
yeah.
about whether or not Jewish kids should marry other Jewish kids.
Well, it's interesting because if you look at what is chosen, you were a vice president and
Yeah.
you created all the things that went into a conference and all the
Right.
speakers, et cetera. And usually you're having a finger on the pulse of what's going on within the communities to offer the various topics that are being offered. But I noticed that I don't see anything that is put out there for the general attenders of the conference about whom we marry. Nothing. Now, they may be addressing it in the youth group meetings. I don't know. But nothing that is coming down at a leadership level so that it's even being addressed even in the delegates meetings. It's
Yeah.
not there. It's not there. So to me, that says something, because whatever's on their minds is what we usually get as what the groups are going to be, what the call-outs are, who the keynote speakers are even. And
I think it's a hard one to bring up. I don't think a lot of people want to. I mean, who's going to volunteer to teach this, right? Because as soon as you do and you start talking about identity, you're going to offend half the people in the room, because half the people in the room think that they're Jewish and they're not.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Maybe this is a topic that a non-Jewish person coming in should teach. Maybe I should work with this one, because as a non-Jewish person who has fully embraced my husband's heritage, and so we can pass it on to you guys. And the struggles, honey, the struggles to get to that point. We want to spare our kids these struggles, and it's a real struggle. They can't just avoid it. They can't just say, "Oh well, I'm married, I've got my kids, I'm moving on." But God has already called them. God has already chosen who He has chosen, and for His reasons, not because anybody's wonderful. I mean, we've seen that. I mean, biblically, just look at just take David, for example, right? But I think it needs to be addressed at that level. And I think I will suggest that. I will suggest that something needs to happen. Maybe a panel with various,
So call it identity and intermarriage.
Yeah. Oh, I think it'd be great. And I think I know several of the keynote people who would even have already been speaking into that, who might want to speak into that. and encourage and having the leaders come into that, then it can kind of trickle down within the congregations. I think it's good if they're addressing it at the level with the youth. That's wonderful because it needs to be addressed.
You know, it's interesting. I was thinking about Rabbi Dowerman. Rabbi Dowerman, his whole thing is interfaithfulness, is what he calls it.
Yeah, right.
But trying to help those intermarried families. I was just thinking about, like, we should maybe try to approach him for the podcast.
I do
because
too.
I think he'd be a good voice. He's such a profound thinker. I don't think I'd be able to keep up with him. But it'd be good to, like, hear him and pick his mind about these things.
Yeah.
Because he's very forceful. And it's interesting, you know, Rabbi Gliebe is also very forceful. As there were, like you were saying, I don't necessarily agree with him.
Strong in his
convictions.
Strong.
Right.
Yes.
But at the same time, like, I think it's important for us to hear these strong voices. And I mean, not the least of which is, like, man, when this generation of strong voices are gone, who's going to be that next generation of strong voices? And
I know.
You know, when the pioneers of Messianic Judaism are in their 70s and their 80s, you're getting towards that time.
That's right.
Needing those second generation strong voices. Although Rabbi Gliebe is younger, he's kind of like Gen X-ish, like me. I think he's
I don't know what his age is.
A little bit older than me. I think he's a little bit older than me.
I think he's older, just judging by his kids that he's older.
Yeah,
well,
we just
Josh,
waited a long time to have kids. So
I believe you are one of those voices and could be and should be one of those voices. I know it's been very hard for you because you're wearing so many hats. And you're not really wearing a UMJC hat right now.
Sure.
But I think you can be one of those voices and should be. It's not about notoriety. It's not about being recognized or put on a pedestal. It's nothing about that. It's about, I mean, fear and trepidation do you speak within within this group. When I had to speak about whether or not women should be rabbis, oh my gosh. Did I tell you?
Read.
Oh my gosh, scholars. And I love to read and I read a lot, but I've never considered myself to be a scholar, not a scholar on that level. I actually was called upon one time to read and edit Stuart Dowman. Can you picture that?
I can't actually imagine that.
I kept a
dictionary.
And,
one sentence would be like a paragraph, and it would be like
at least. Oh yeah. Like, okay, does it still agree here?
It'd be like
blah, blah,
reading
blah.
Heschel, and it'd be like, man, I don't know if I'm smart enough to read this.
Yeah, but
like
Heschel
where each sentence
he keeps it in shorter sentences than Stuart does. And I can read Heschel. I can follow Heschel. Well, I can follow Stuart too. But that was so intimidating. And I think that's the thing, is we cannot be intimidated by the giants of that generation. We need to make sure that the giants from this generation have voice and are not intimidated to speak those voices. And I think another thing is, that's why I appreciate not just Kurt Gliebe, but his son Matthew, that they're willing to speak up in unpopular situations. And I know it must feel like a lonely spot from time to time. I definitely identify with that, and you must too.
Sure.
We speak up for things that, seem to make a lot of sense to us. I mean, God has called us to think them, I think.
Right.
I mean, I'm willing to listen to the other view. In fact, that's why I learned a lot from Kirk, what he had to say. But at any rate, sorry to get off on a rabbit trail.
No, that was a good one.
Rabbit trail number 2.
I'm just curious if there were other big takeaways. Like, what was another, like, a big thing where, like, oh man, that really resonated, or that hit kind of hard?
One thing I came away with was I was encouraged that a voice like Kirk's feels the way we do. I was encouraged by that because it can be discouraging. Because we've seen the wave. We saw the wave, the major influx of Messianic believers come in. I mean, I was part of that group. I was with those people as they came in.
I think it was a big wave. I think the bigger wave was later.
Right after.
It was in the 90s.
Right. Well, no, I'm talking about the Jews coming to the
You're
Lord.
talking about the original.
I'm talking about the original.
Correct.
But
okay.
No.
Yeah. But I thought you were talking about the wave of Gentiles coming in the 90s.
No, but when you look at, our congregation is 34 years old. So when you look at that, and we look at almost like in decades, if we look at the different decades of what was going on, we really didn't begin realizing that there was an issue or a quote problem until about at least 10 or 12 years in, when we started getting this massive influx of people who were saying, not only do I think I'm supposed to be with you and I'm not Jewish, but I think you got to do it differently too, because
Right.
I don't, culturally, it's not who I am. And I thought, that's like people saying, I want to go to America, but let's change its culture.
Right.
But what attracted you to it in the first place needs to remain.
Right.
That needs to
Right.
remain.
Yeah.
And so for me, I feel like that's what we've got to be stronger about, but do it in love, because I ended up intercepting one of your calls this last week. I don't know how it happened. I think because I'm on the website as a contact person for the Oneg Gadol.
Okay.
But I got
A phone call?
not a phone call, but a message, a text
Okay.
message from a person who said, "Oh, I found you. I'm coming from such and such a place, and I found one that observes the Sabbath."
Right.
And I said, you happen to reach one of the leaders who is not a person who has that conversation normally. But I just said, I was bold. I said, this may not be the place for you. I said,
Right.
we are created for Jews and interfaith families primarily, because Gentiles who believe and love the Jewish Messiah can attend anywhere. There are so many wonderful churches that we've referred people to. So go there and worship and be an ambassador. So keep anti-Semitism out of that group. But I just felt like I was supposed to speak boldly. I'm sorry, I usurped a role
Yeah.
there. But
I get many of those emails.
I know
would
you
say
do.
my top categories are Sabbatarians,
Yes.
Seventh-day Adventists,
Yes.
people who the worship on the correct day is
Correct. I know. That's like
right.
as soon as they say that, it's like,
Correct. Yeah, that's immediate. It's like, oh, I know exactly where you're coming from.
Well, and that's one thing I said. I said it was very brief, but I did say, you need to stop worrying about what day they worship on. Worry about what kind of worship is going on. If they truly love God,
I get it. They're not going to get that message at most churches. They're not going to have people wrestling with the holidays. Like, I understand, right?
No.
I get that. But man, how can I best explain this? I think all of us think that we're the main character.
It's true. It's very true.
And so we think that wherever we are is about us.
Yes.
And it's not about the other people. And I understand that. I mean, I think it's for sure human nature. I'm part of it. I was thinking about it even this morning. I was out really early in the morning to exercise, as I do. And when I'm exercising and I'm running on the street or like walking on the street, I think of myself as the most important thing on that street. And cars need to watch out for me. And they need to go around, right? And so, like, because of this, sometimes I almost get hit by vehicles. It's not the smartest thing. But then this morning I was driving out and taking my kids to school, and there was this person exercising, walking on the street. And my immediate thought was like, get on the sidewalk. What are you doing? Why are you out here in the street? Get on the sidewalk. And I know, because of all my running experience and everything else, that actually walking and running on asphalt is much better for your body than the sidewalk. And I could go into like 14 different reasons why. But like immediately I thought, like, you're not the main character. I'm the main character. Get on the sidewalk. What are you doing? And so, like, it's a natural thing for all of us in almost all of our life. It's something that God has to really work in us. To be humble like our Messiah, to me, is one of the hardest callings, the deepest callings of faith in Yeshua, is to be transformed into a humble person that isn't the main character, even though he was literally the main character. Yeah. So I think a lot of people, especially in our consumeristic society here in the United States, well, that's actually a consumerism that's writ large now across our world. They think that it's about them.
That's right.
And I would say 99% of the emails that I receive are about them and how Beth Yeshua can help them, or how Beth Yeshua can change to be what they want. And when I confront them with the calling and the purpose of Beth Yeshua, they're offended and they say, well, how dare you? You're not being very welcoming. And I'm like, that's right, because I don't know that everybody needs to be here or should be here. I mean, we were talking about how hard it is to be part of Messianic Judaism, and we're both called to be part of it, and it's still hard.
It is very
So
hard.
if you're coming into this because you really think Christmas is pagan and you need to celebrate and worship on the right days, man, it's going to derail you. It's going to derail you for quite some time.
It's the external things again. It's those external things, those signs. I think it's interesting. This has come up in several Bible studies that I participate in more than once. And that is when we read the Bible and we're hearing admonitions about do this or don't do that, we think it's about those other people. None of us imagine that we are the person that God is speaking to. It's about those other people. And in Revelations, when God speaks about, I wish that you were hot or cold, the lukewarm, and none of us think we're lukewarm. We think we're bound to be the hot one. You know, we're on it. We're on everything. But it's not true. We are not the main character of the Bible. Jesus is. Yeshua is. Right?
That's right. Yeah.
So, amen. Amen. Yeah. Preach it, right?
Right.
Oh, wow.
Well, we should probably wrap up fairly soon. I just was wondering if there were any last takeaways from what Rabbi said. I know that we both talked a little bit beforehand about, goodness, how difficult it is to turn a battleship, and how
that's right.
If a community, which is really interesting, right? Because I think it's similar to marriages. If you have the hard conversation before you get married,
yes,
about identity and purposeful conversations about that, then it smooths out so much. Both you and I, we were not thinking on that level when we were married. And so God was merciful and allowed us to find somebody. But I think it's the same way. Rabbi Gliebe was saying, well, you really have to have guiding documents that are aligned with the actual vision of Messianic Judaism, and you need to stick to them.
And stick to them.
Enforce your vision. I think a lot of communities probably have that original vision, probably have bylaws and charters that are very similar to ours, and maybe just don't enforce them anymore because of the wave of Gentiles that came in the 90s, the feeling that we should be one new man, the feeling that we should be inclusive, the feeling that maybe Messianic Judaism needs to evolve. Maybe Messianic Judaism should be something different. Maybe it should be more like a Hebrew roots church. And it's interesting, I've thought about that. I thought how big Beth Yeshua, our community, could be if we just made it into a Hebrew roots church. We could have hundreds and hundreds of people, instantly, overnight.
You're turning away, how many a week do you think you're turning away just by having that conversation with them?
7 a week.
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah. All the time.
And that's families.
For years.
Right? That's whole families, right?
Yeah.
I'm just saying, love you. God bless you on your journey. Don't think this is the place for you.
Yes.
And people hear me say that, oh my goodness, these are people that need God. No, every single one of these people is already saved. Every single one of these people already has a walk with Messiah. Right. Every single one of them, which is so weird. I don't have almost any emails from people that are wondering about a walk with God or never entered into a relationship with God yet. It's always established Christians who have been turned on to the Hebrew roots in some sort of way. But anyways, so the reality, I think, for us and for other communities, we talked about this a little bit, is can you actually enforce your original vision? Or, man, maybe it's even harder. Maybe your original vision doesn't actually line up with what you think Messianic Judaism should be. And, also, there's a lot of people who disagree with his vision of Messianic Judaism. Right? There's a lot of people that would listen to what Rabbi Gliebe said and be like, that's not Messianic Judaism. There's probably Messianic Jewish leaders that would listen to our podcast and be like, hey, that's not what Messianic Judaism should be. I think, for example, about the rift, I don't know if it's fair to call it a rift, the distance or difference that exists between the MJAA and the UMJC. The MJAA has a very different one new man vision for what Messianic Judaism looks like. And it would be really interesting to know how that's serving them. Are they passing on Jewish values? Are they continuing to have Jewish families? Does that really matter? Does God bring in people by the power of his Spirit so it's not that big of a deal? I'd be curious.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. We have a Jewish man in our congregation that we might be bringing on. I don't want to mention a name, but I think it'd be interesting to hear from someone who has intermarried, did not marry a Jewish person, and how that impacted his family. I think it might be interesting to hear from more than just our family. People can see this is something that's happening. And for him, at this stage of his life, I don't know how old he is, but he's at least your age, and he's coming into this now at this stage in his life when I think most of his kids are even raised and grown. So it's been a journey. It's been even, I would suggest it might be a struggle, but he's like this bright shining beacon every Saturday. He's just like in awe. He's home, and a home he didn't even know he needed. So, I mean, but I think we're not going to minimize what God could do and what God wants to do. But in his awakening people from intermarriage, from the intermarriage group, I think it's going to be important that we're there for them, that we're there to support them in whatever way we can. We can help that spouse along in whatever way they want. But back to what you said before, it has to come from them. The Jewish one has to want it, really want it. And it helps if it happens to be the Jewish man who's the leader of that family, quote unquote. And if he can do that, and or she, like we have somebody in our congregation who was basically raised at Beth Yeshua and has come with that non-Jewish spouse, and I think her loving that and his love for her, which is kind of what was with my case. My love for your husband, your father is my husband, was what drew me, and I think God is going to do that. But as going back to the very beginning of this conversation, I now I feel more empowered to help because I'm not trying to carry the load for them. I'm trying to share the burden and give them whatever resources they need as they are ready. I'm not here to convince people you want to connect with your Jewish identity. So,
in some ways, I think us just living a very vibrant Messianic Judaism is the best that we can do, because that'll convince them that this is something worth pursuing. It's something that they want to have.
Well, people are asking me all the time. They're saying, "You're not Jewish. Why aren't you doing this or that?" I said, "I have Jewish grandchildren." I have Jewish grandchildren. Praise God.
Yeah. I think that's a really good place for us to wrap up. Any final thoughts before we sign off?
Well, I would like to revisit the situation of bringing in Rabbi Dauerman. I think that would be lovely. Hopefully, I don't know if he ever listens to this, but maybe he'll feel welcomed by that. We've had him come many times to speak, and he always speaks on interfaithfulness, as you put it, as he puts it. So, I mean, I think the more we can bring in people to speak to this issue who have strong voices, I think it will help people if they're on the fence about it. So,
there's a podcast, I think it's called Two Messianic Jews. And
really?
I want to say that they are like semi-affiliated with like MJAA, or maybe they're like originally from MJAA congregations. And they're both in either like seminary or yeshiva or something. I've listened just to a couple of their episodes and really appreciated it. It'd be interesting to maybe bring them on too.
Wow, that would be wonderful.
And have some of these conversations about, I don't want us to just become like the intermarried or interfaithfulness podcast. I know that there's other things for us to talk about also, like, we talked about October 7th and the ramifications for what that's going to mean for Israel now and for all time. In the psyche of the Jewish people, but I think it would be good to hear more of these voices. I agree with you.
Yeah, wonderful.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Mom. Thank you for joining me like at school. This is like some of my award-winning yearbooks and magazines back behind us. I don't know if I told you. Did I tell you 3 of my editors received their finalists for Graphic Designer of the Year? With the NSPA nationally.
Whoa.
That means there's 30 names on that list. 30 names.
And the 3 of them are yours.
Yeah, 3 of them
in
are
the
mine.
nation.
Incredible.
Pretty cool. Wonderful.
Really cool kids.
Wow.
Anyway, so thank you everybody for listening to our podcast. We are going to try to keep doing every 2 weeks. It's it's busy, especially during the fall, as we have all the festivals and other things. But we're really wanting to do this. I think it helps us process. I'm hoping it's helping you guys process too. As always, if you want to see us rather than just hear us, go to YouTube, look for Beth Yeshua SAC, SAC, and you can also check us out on Spotify. Thank you so much. All right, bye, Mom.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can always visit bethyeshua.org for more.